The afternoon sun hung low in the sky, spilling a soft golden light over the wide, open grounds of the cemetery. The place was known for its silence, not the kind of silence that feels cold or empty, but a deep, respectful quiet. Visitors often walked slowly here, their heads slightly bowed, reading the engraved names and dates, placing flowers, whispering short prayers. It was a place where time seemed to pause, where every sound, the rustle of a leaf, the chirp of a bird, the distant tapping of a guard's shoes, carried weight. That afternoon seemed like any other. A light breeze passed through the rows of tall trees, making their leaves shimmer gently. Families walked together, holding hands. An elderly couple stood near one of the stones, their eyes wet with quiet tears. A group of students on a school trip walked in a line behind their teacher, learning about the stories of courage and sacrifice that rested there. A few guards stood at their posts, their uniforms perfectly straight, their faces calm and serious. Everything looked peaceful, or at least it did at first. Among the people walking through the gate was a man who didn't seem to fit in with the rest of the crowd. He kept his head down and walked a little too quickly. His steps were not like the slow, thoughtful steps of the visitors. His shoulders were tense, his hands deep inside the pockets of his dark jacket, and he kept glancing to the left and right as if looking for something or someone. The air around him felt uneasy, like a string pulled too tight. He blended into the crowd well enough that no one noticed him at first. But one of the guards did. The guard had been trained to see small details. Details most people might ignore. He noticed the man's shoes were dusty, unlike most visitors who dress neatly to show respect. He noticed the man avoided eye contact with everyone around him. Most of all, he noticed the way the man's breathing quickened as he got closer to the ceremonial tomb. Something wasn't right. Still, the guard didn't show his concern on his face. His expression stayed calm and focused. But inside, he had already begun watching more carefully. The ceremonial tomb was the most respected place on the grounds. A single guard stood at attention in front of it, as still as a statue. People from all over the world came to see it. Children often whispered in awe, amazed at how the guard never moved, no matter how hot or cold it was. Tourists took pictures, but what most didn't know was how much training it took to stand there, not just to hold a position, but to sense danger without showing fear. The man in the jacket moved closer. He stopped for a moment to look around. Then he took a slow step forward, then another, his shoes brushing softly against the pavement. The closer he got, the more the first guard watched him. A second guard, standing a short distance away, also noticed. They had a silent way of communicating. One look, one small movement of the eyes, and they both understood something was happening. The crowd, still unaware, continued their quiet walk. Some people stood near the tomb, taking pictures, whispering stories, pointing toward the guard in admiration. A child tugged on his mother's hand, asking if the guard was a real person or a statue. The mother smiled and whispered back. The afternoon carried on as usual, except for the growing tension beneath the calm surface. The man wiped his forehead nervously, though the air was not hot. He shifted his weight from one foot to another. A group of tourists passed by him, laughing softly at a joke one of them made. He didn't laugh. His eyes stayed locked on the ceremonial tomb. There was something strange in the way he stared. Not the quiet respect of a visitor, but a heavy, restless look. It was as if a storm was quietly forming inside him. Unseen by everyone, but sensed by those trained to look for it. The guard near the tomb didn't move. He was trained not to, but his eyes saw everything. He noticed the small tremor in the man's hands, the way his shoulders tightened. And most of all, he noticed the way the man's steps no longer matched the rhythm of the other visitors. It was as if he was walking in a different world, one made of tension and secrets, step by step. The man approached. The world around him seemed to narrow. Like everything else was fading away except the guard in front of him. The sound of the wind, the whisper of people talking, even the birds in the trees. All of it disappeared in his ears. His heartbeat grew louder, filling his chest like a drum. The guard standing at attention felt the shift too. It wasn't something loud or obvious. It was more like the air itself had changed, becoming heavier. His training told him that something was about to happen. But he stayed still. That was part of his duty, to hold his position, to protect the sacred ground, to trust his team. The man stopped just a few steps away. He lowered his head, as if unsure of what to do. For a moment, there was silence, a deep, heavy silence. The breeze paused. Even the people nearby seemed to slow down without knowing why. Then, with hands that trembled slightly, the man moved inside his jacket. In that second, everything became sharp. One guard's eyes narrowed, the other's muscles tensed, but their faces stayed calm. No one shouted. No one screamed. The crowd still didn't understand what was happening, but the guards did. The man's hand stayed hidden for a long second, long enough to make the tension stretch like a rope ready to snap. The man took a deep breath. His shoulders rose, then fell. His eyes lifted from the ground to meet the guards straight ahead. In that look was a mix of fear, desperation, and something else, something hard to name. He pulled something from inside his jacket, moving quickly, and aimed it forward. The guard's heart rate increased, but his hands didn't move. His breathing stayed steady, just like he had practiced hundreds of times. He didn't speak, but his posture said everything: strength, calm, and readiness. A gasp came from someone in the crowd. A woman covered her mouth. A man froze mid-step. The children who had been laughing a few moments ago grew quiet without even knowing why. It was as if everyone suddenly felt the invisible weight of the moment. The guard closest to the tomb slightly adjusted his feet, not enough for a casual observer to notice, but enough for the other guards to recognize the signal. It meant, stay calm, stay focused. Another guard, positioned a few meters away, slowly began to move closer, careful not to alarm anyone or make the situation worse. The man holding the object didn't say a word. His breathing came fast and uneven. His hand shook a little, though he tried to hide it. The guard's eyes never left his. They stayed steady, unwavering. In those few seconds, everything felt stretched, like time had slowed down. The leaves swayed softly, the air was still, and the world held its breath. The man's mind was spinning fast. The guard's training told him not to let that panic show on his face. The man stared at him, almost waiting for him to react. But he didn't. The guard didn't give fear, didn't give anger, didn't give surprise. He gave silence. That silence was powerful. It wrapped around the man like an invisible wall. For the first time, he seemed unsure. His steps faltered slightly. His fingers twitched. The guard's steady breathing and calm expression became a mirror, showing the man his own storm. A tourist began whispering to someone nearby, their voice trembling. Others started slowly backing away without really understanding what was going on. Some instinct told them that something wasn't right. A small child looked up at their father, confused by the sudden stillness around them. The father gently put his arm around the child and guided them behind a pillar. The guards standing at attention didn't need to say anything to his team. They had trained for moments like this over and over again. Their movements were quiet, smooth, and precise. One moved slightly to the left, another positioned themselves at an angle, and their presence slowly began to shape a safe space without anyone needing to shout or panic. The man holding the object shifted on his feet again. He looked around, as if only now realizing how many people were nearby. His breath came even faster. His eyes darted from the guard to the crowd and back again. The guard's eyes didn't waver. They stayed locked, calm, centered. The man's past had brought him here. He had made choices that had led him down a path he couldn't easily step away from. He felt trapped, like the world had closed in on him. But what he didn't expect was this silence, this stillness, to make him feel so small. The guard didn't look scared. He didn't even look angry. He just stood there like a wall that couldn't be moved. A few more people in the crowd began to quietly leave the area, guided by another officer who appeared at the far end. There were no sirens, no loud orders, just quiet, controlled movement. The situation was tense, but it was contained. The guards moved with the kind of quiet strength that comes from training and trust. The man lowered his hand for just a moment, unsure of himself. His eyes blinked rapidly, his mind racing. He had expected fear. He had expected chaos. But what he got was stillness. And in that stillness, something inside him shook. The guard remained as steady as a mountain. His breathing was quiet, his eyes clear. The world around them, the trees, the people, the wind, seemed to fade away, leaving just the two of them facing each other in the soft afternoon light. For the man, the ground beneath him felt both real and unreal at the same time. His thoughts twisted and tangled, unsure where to go. He hadn't planned for this. He hadn't planned for calm. And slowly, without anyone saying a word, the balance of power began to shift. The man stood there frozen, his breathing uneven, his hands trembling slightly though he tried to hide it. The soft afternoon breeze brushed against his jacket, carrying with it the distant sound of rustling leaves. A few people in the background still didn't fully understand what was happening, but something in the air had changed. It wasn't loud, it wasn't chaotic, but it was heavy, like the air before a storm. The guard in front of him hadn't moved. His stance was strong, straight, and calm. His eyes were steady, not filled with fear, not even with anger, just quiet focus. The man kept expecting someone to shout, or to run toward him, or to make things explode into a sudden rush of movement. But none of that happened. Instead, what he got was stillness, deep, silent, powerful stillness. He had lived most of his life running from choices, from people, from himself. But this was different. In front of him stood someone who didn't flinch, didn't panic. That silence was louder than any siren could have been. It wrapped around him like a mirror, showing him everything he didn't want to face. The second guard, the one who had been watching carefully from the side, took a step forward. It wasn't fast or threatening. It was slow, almost gentle. The man noticed, of course. But the step wasn't enough to set him off. The step was more like a whisper than a shout, a quiet reminder that he wasn't alone in this moment. The crowd was slowly being guided away from the scene by another officer. A few people still watched from a distance, standing behind a low stone wall. No one shouted. No one pushed. It was all quiet movement, like water flowing around a rock. The guard team had trained for moments like this, and it showed. Everything they did was steady, patient, and controlled. The man's eyes darted around again. He saw the edges of the crowd disappear. He saw the guard's quiet positions. He saw the tomb behind the guard, still, dignified, unbroken. For a moment, it wasn't just him standing there with fear in his chest. It was him standing in front of something bigger than himself, something calm, strong, and rooted like the stones. Beneath his feet, his breath came out shaky. He had spent years making decisions that led him here. Each one felt small at the time, but together they built a wall he could no longer climb over. And now, with the guard standing so calmly in front of him, it felt like the wall was closing in. The guard didn't speak. He didn't need to. He let the silence do the talking. The man's heartbeat was loud in his ears. His fingers twitched. For a moment, he almost tightened his grip on the object in his hand. But something inside him told him to stop. It wasn't a voice or a command. It was something quieter, something human. The guard took a slow breath. Not a loud breath, just enough that his chest rose gently. He had practiced this 1,000 times. A single calm breath could change the direction of a moment. It wasn't magic, it was control. And in that breath, the man saw something that unsettled him more than any loud order could have: peace. That single breath reminded the man of everything he didn't have anymore: a steady place to stand, a quiet moment, a feeling of safety. For so long, his life had been noise, panic, running. And here was someone who stood still in the middle of it all. The man lowered his arm slightly, not much, just enough to ease the pressure he felt in his chest. He didn't even fully realize he was doing it. His mind was tired. His shoulders slumped just a little. His heartbeat was still racing, but his thoughts were slowing down, not spinning like they were before. A gentle voice came from the side. It wasn't sharp or loud. It was warm, patient. One of the guards who had moved closer was speaking softly to him now. The man turned his head slightly, his brow furrowed. It had been so long since someone spoke to him like that. He didn't catch every word at first, but he heard the tone, calm, not judging, not forcing, just steady. The voice reminded him of a time years ago when things were simpler, when people still spoke to him without fear or anger. He didn't even realize how much he missed that sound. The guard in front of him remained still. He was a quiet pillar, standing between the man and the sacred place behind him. The other guard's voice continued, slow and steady. The man's breathing began to match the rhythm of that voice without him trying. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. His hands, once trembling, began to steady. A few more guards quietly took their places around the scene, forming a calm circle. There was no shouting, no rushing. Everything was silent and smooth, like a dance they had practiced many times. The man looked around and saw their eyes, not cold, not mocking, just focused. He had expected anger. Instead, what he got was a kind of patience he didn't know how to handle. The soft breeze returned. It brushed against his hair and carried the faint smell of grass and old stone. The sound of birds came back into focus, for the first time in what felt like hours. Though it had only been minutes, the man felt the world around him again. The guard's eyes in front of him didn't change. They were calm, steady, anchored. They didn't try to push him, they just waited. That waiting did something to him. It made him realize that in this moment, he had a choice, a real one, not the kind of rushed, forced choices he had been making for years, a quiet, real choice. The other guard's voice grew a little clearer, though still soft. He wasn't demanding anything. He was offering a way out, a way to step away from this edge before it was too late. The man's shoulders rose and fell with a shaky breath. His fingers loosened just slightly. He thought of the path that brought him here. He thought of all the nights he spent looking over his shoulder, never really resting. He thought of the fear that had grown inside him like a shadow that never left. And then he thought about this moment, this strange, silent moment with a guard standing calm in front of him, the breeze moving gently around them, and the world holding its breath. He realized, suddenly, that he was tired, truly tired, not just of running, but of carrying everything alone. The guard in front of him finally moved, but only slightly, a small step forward, slow, steady. The man's eyes widened for a moment, but something about the guard's calm energy kept the panic from growing. It was like watching someone approach not as an enemy, but as a person. Another guard moved slightly closer too, just enough to make the space feel smaller but safer. The man could feel the world slowly closing in, not like a trap, but like hands gently reaching out to steady someone who's falling. His breathing grew uneven again, but now for a different reason. His chest ached, not from fear, but from everything he had been holding in for years. His throat tightened. He blinked a few times. He didn't want anyone to see the tears forming in his eyes, but they came anyway. The guard's voice from the side said something soft again. This time, the man heard the words, "You're not alone." Simple words, no long speeches, no shouting, just that. And somehow, they cut through the noise in his head like light through a cloud. The man's hand lowered more. His arm grew heavy, as if the weight he had been carrying was too much to keep holding. His shoulders slumped again, more noticeably this time. The steady rhythm of the guards around him didn't change. Their patience didn't break. They waited. A small group of people who had been quietly watching from behind the wall held their breath. As they saw the change, it wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud, but it was clear. The man's whole body language was shifting. The storm inside him was slowly, carefully, being calmed by the quiet strength around him. He looked into the guard's eyes one last time. There was no hatred there, no judgment, no harshness. Just a steady human presence. That was the moment something inside him gave way. His hand loosened completely. He closed his eyes, letting out a shaky breath he didn't know he'd been holding. The guards didn't rush him. They didn't need to. Everything moved in quiet, practiced harmony. One guard slowly approached, another stood ready, and the man let them guide him. No one raised their voice. No one panicked. It was calm, almost gentle. The people watching felt a wave of relief, like they had all been holding their breath together. Some even put a hand over their hearts. It wasn't just because the moment was over. It was because of how it ended. Not in chaos, not in fear, but in quiet human connection. The man's knees felt weak as everything that had built up inside him began to sink. For years, he had felt like the world was always chasing him, always ready to collapse. But in this moment, with the guards, steady eyes on him, and the warm breeze brushing past, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: stillness. As the guards carefully guided him away, their movements steady and respectful, the crowd began to exhale softly. Parents held their children a little closer. Tourists exchanged quiet words. No one clapped, no one cheered. The moment didn't need noise. It was already powerful enough in silence. The guard who had stood at attention all along didn't celebrate or show pride. He simply returned to his position, straight and still, as if nothing had happened. But everyone who had been there knew it wasn't nothing. It was something they would remember for a long time. News of what had happened traveled fast. People who weren't there would hear about it later. But those who had seen it with their own eyes knew that the most powerful part of the story wasn't about force or speed. It was about calm. It was about patience. It was about how a single person, standing still with strength in their heart, could stop a storm.